All right, this is Drew Spence from the Dynamic Universe, Dynamica Comics. This is my episode, Complete Adventure, The Incendiary, The Man Who Burns. This is the end of season 2 of my 4-6 comic book series. So we're looking at the end of season 2. It's a giant story arc. I think it's 3 episodes, where we have Kojin the Annihilator taking on a bunch of fighters, and the story has a bunch of parallels and a jump around in time. And a few people who read this got confused with the time jumping, and of course, I turned things up, so it got even worse in season 3 when I did the speed kill story arc where I keep jumping back in hours. But I thought it was pretty cool. So this is one of the first times I played with the convention of showing 2 parallel events that aren't really happening in real time. But the Incendiary, I knew this was going to be a heavy action story because the whole point was basically combat. And what we're talking about basically in this one is fight choreography. The last one that I did, we were talking about the story building. That was episode 24. This is more about just getting right to action, framing a bunch of impactful moments, and this is it. And what I like to do, I'm a big fan of portrait type covers. As you've seen my work from Killer Butterfly and 4-6, these are the kind of covers that I am really into. And I'm not a really huge fan, to each their own, but I'm not a huge fan of a character talking and throwing punches on the cover where it looks like I just pulled a panel from the comic and used it as the cover. I like this big portrait movie poster look. And that's what, drew me into a lot of comics before I started doing my own. This was the kind of image that would do it. I used to be inspired in a heavy metal magazine. They'd have the ad pages where you would see graphic novels and you see the cover and the name of a graphic novel, and I'd always be inspired by that and say, wow, which one of those would be mine? It's like the game you play when you see a car go by and you go, that would be my car. If I was, a rich guy, that'd be my car. And we do that sometimes with comics, at least I used to, where I would see like a book cover and go, okay, that would be the cover I would use. Or that would be the title of my series. That fits in with what I envision for myself. So in that context, going forward, these are the kind of things, these are the kind of images that inspired me. This great bunch of characters together. So this is the comiXology reader. I also have an issue ISSUU site that sells my comics also, but this is the comiXology. Everyone kind of knows what this is on Amazon. You get the idea. But this is the 4-6. I have my my main page, which I love putting these together. I actually had to do this because of a requirement when I did it as a some kind of book. I think it was for iTunes. I can't remember who, but someone demanded I had a page with this kind of information on, and I need to lock down the page. It's like a digital publication. So since then, that kind of spilled over and kept with me, where I keep making these splash pages with the actual text that I'm basically forced to put together in my book. But we get an idea. Here's an overview, because some people jump in and, you like to cover a comic, you just start reading that one. I used to do that too. Just look at a cool cover and buy the book and then see what was in it. So I got to give you some background information. This explains the team. You get to see some shots to see who is who. I love this shot too. I'm going on a tangent. We haven't gotten to the story yet, but I love this shot of Louise and agility. That is just so appropriate with her personality. She just has to somehow get a little bit more in front than him. Which is also, I love their relationship, that he is actually the real champion character who's done combat sports. He's won accolades. He's actually like a big deal in that arena, but she still has some weird sort of sense of, I've always got to get a little bit in front of him. I've got to always put him in a position where I'm slightly ahead, where she's really competing with him and he's oblivious to the, but he's oblivious to the idea that she's competing or she's even in his lane for competition. So he never takes her personally, except that, you're going to see earlier in season 4, you should get a moment where you get to see that. But I've always thought that's funny that in her mind, she's thinking one way and he's just oblivious to her as, his partner. But we begin with a shot. There's a base up in the clouds. It's on a high mountain peak that it burst a cloud layer. And I got this idea from seeing some of the pictures I believe it's in Asia, where you see, like, we can go on a trip and climb this mountain. And when you get to the top of the mountain, it's above the cloud layer. So you get to look out and just see the tops of buildings of a shrine. And I just thought that was an incredible shot. That kind of inspired me. So I said, I want to do something where there's just such a high peak that you can see buildings through the top of the cloud layer. So we're basically getting a recount of episode, I believe it's 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, where it was the first time, really episode 9, where the Annihilators are going up against the Synthoids. And the Synthoids are synthetic humans that are being created as basically fully blown adults, and they expect to replace humanity. In the 4-6 universe, humans are just one set of species among all the things in the universe, which is why we really don't have racism anymore, because being human is enough. And it's kind of a larger statement of how we are, as you could almost argue, Americans. And when you put two people from the same city together, they'll argue over which borough are you from. This is the best borough. No, my borough is this. And then when you get out of state, you argue about what state you're from. And it doesn't really matter what city you're from. The state is what counts. And then when you go on a global scale, it's about what country. If you're an American, it's all good. We're just all Americans in this. And eventually it just keeps building to a point where I kind of realized in a future context, when there's so many other species and so many other creatures in the world, you'd be pretty silly to be still concerned with what planet you're from, what area you're from, what race are you when there's other species in the mix. So humans, for instance, were low on the totem pole of space colonizing, space-faring creatures. So humans are actually battling for their own state to just be accepted as being humans. So the idea of racism or being worried about what you are, the color of your skin, is really silly when it's really humanoid versus a million other different shapes and sizes. And what we have is lots of things in the universe trying to replace humans and better them. The robots tried it, right? And said, you know what? You don't really need humans. We can have robots, right? Shapeshifters tried it. Why be just this one humanoid shape? We can be these other things. And now Synthoids are having their sort of smoldering beginning where they're trying to replace humans in the universe. Like, a human is only limited to this. We can artificially create something better than a human, stronger, more durable, better brain capacity. We can do a lot of things that improve the human condition. Let's try that as the dominant species in the humanoid form. So the Synthoids are basically at the very beginning of their movement and their time to sort of think they can stake their claim as being the thing that should represent us as human. So we're recapping episode 9, where the 4-6 really had their first taste and got into a good little mix. So we're learning a couple little things behind it. The numbers and the names are Victoria and Victor, which is, of course, the alternate spelling for sci-fi sake. And, these are base models, which I think is funny. These are base models in the Daz store, and I've kept the name. So I thought it was a little bit of an ode to the Daz store system that this particular model, I'm paying homage to the lineage by keeping the names the same. Like, this is truly Victoria and Victor being used in the 4-6, where now all the clones all have that same name. They just have numbers. Like, this is Victoria 20. So you're going to sort of see the same models keep reappearing. And obviously, she had her eye blown out by Jackie in episode 9, I believe it is. So, she's kept that damage and hasn't really repaired it. And his predecessor was destroyed in one of those earlier, I think it was the building blocks story arc. So what we have here in the beginning is an assassin being hired to kill the Annihilators. So basically they're hiring this really awesome assassin. And he's part of another group, which will come up in the future. But he's part of a bigger group of assassins. And he's, flying this dragon. Of course, I'm laying out little seeds for the future, but this is a great shot of him just riding this dragon. Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah, I forgot about some of this stuff. Yeah, I don't do the 2-page splash often, but look at that hand. Okay, so he rides the dragon, he gets to the base, they give him entrance. So this is like one story going on, and you're basically getting the idea that they've hired this assassin. By the way, there's tons of spoilers in this. So if you haven't read one of my stories, if you've read this, you're probably like geeking out and getting little tidbits of extra information from the writer and creator himself. If you haven't read it, you might be curious, like, well, I've gotten a lot of reviews on the 4/6 series. I'm also in a lot of like the beginner comics tier, where I share my stuff in Facebook groups and other channels and forums. And a lot of people are just beginning with their comics. They're still, they're doing GoFundMes, they're doing Kickstarters, trying to get their first book made, which is an awesome place to be, an exciting time. But I have, many, many series and episodes out. So sometimes, if you don't know what this is, I'm not sort of at the point saying, I have a great idea, someone need to help me get it out there. My ideas are already out there. So if you keep seeing me sharing my episodes, I know some creators love other creators and you're inspired by their work. And like, I know when I was into music, I would buy the kind of albums that would inspire me. And I look for people whose stuff I could sample, would give me an idea for how to rhyme or how to make my music, or they make a kind of song that I'd be inspired by. And sometimes comics is the same way, where you sort of see someone, you go, okay, I can pull something from that guy. I'm going to take something from him. Oh, I'm going to see how he does this, and I'm going to do it similar. And that's really, as a creative, because, being a creative and an artist is a very selfish thing. You're mostly concerned with yourself, and you really don't have time to care about anybody else. So there's a huge part of it that is me, 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 me. And if it's not helping you, you tend not to care. And I understand that, which is fine. But if you keep seeing me sharing this stuff, you might be curious, like, what is this guy doing with these books, and what is it about at a level? And maybe this will sometimes give you an insight to what I actually do and what I create myself and what I'm into. And going forward, I love this effect that I did. This was showing like how blurry the monitor is. So someone who read my comic said to me, like, and the picture is messed up. Some of the pictures are messed up in the book. And I said, yeah, it's a monitor that doesn't have a clear transmission. Like, I don't suddenly forget how to make an image. I did this on purpose to show that this is a transmission, and it's not coming in completely clear. It's distorted. Like, but I think when some people read the comic, they just expect certain things and don't sort of realize the kind of control you have over a lot of this. So anyhow, the assassin arrives, and you get the idea that they're going to hire this guy to kill the 4/6, and that's the game plan. So then we jump to below those clouds we saw, there's some kind of like restaurant deck place that, this group is hanging out at. So you get the idea, they're a bit of a rough bunch, and they're hanging out. And this is when the artwork inspires the story. This part is really awesome. So they're finishing up their dinner, and she's explaining and giving a little hint, one of those fragment conversations that doesn't make sense the first time you hear it, but it will make sense later. Where she's saying that she was in a fight with a guy, and he put his hands up in that classic wrestling thing where the two wrestlers lock their fingers and they go chest to chest and they're wavering and they're pushing, and the bad guy overtakes the good guy, and then the good guy gets his power going, and then he overpowers the bad guy, even though it's completely impossible from the leverage advantage that a guy could be leaned over so far backwards and overpower the other guy. It's an awesome thing for the crowd to get into when there's a shift in power levels. People love that. So with that said, she's basically saying that the guy she was fighting did that with the fingers, and she locked into him and she gave him the juice. And the juice is going to come up later, which is why, it's a little inside joke here. But this part was awesome, is that I actually have Kojin in the scene. I wasn't sure where the fight was going to begin, so I loaded the 3D figure of Kojin into the scene. So he was loaded in the scene by accident. And only when I rendered it did I realize that he was in the background. And I looked close and I said, is that Kojin? Oh, I realized I loaded him. So once I loaded him, I said, you know what? I'm going to keep him in the scene. This is an accident that looks awesome now. So now I have a scene where they're saying like, hey, that waiter is watching us. which now places him in context that Kojin is basically undercover as a waiter in this weird restaurant just to get access to these three characters. So you get the idea, like, okay, that's how he got in there and caught up with him. So they go to the bathroom. I have one of my funny jokes that she goes in there and she smells something funky, and it's an alien taking a dump, basically. So she basically, tells the guy, get the hell out the bathroom, because, she's like the bodyguard of this awesome character. You're not really sure who the trio is, but they're important. So Kojin shows up and says, hey, I'm not here to use the bathroom. I'm here to take that case from you. And you realize now that the case is important. Like, the case is now a heavy item because he's here to take the case. So you've got to now wonder, well, what's in the case that he's going to show up? I mean, this is the 4-6 Annihilators, so it has to be something big and important. That they're not just stealing stuff. So there's got to be a larger story that's going on here. So she decides, I'm going to fight him first. And I love this shot. I used this, I think, in the beginning of one of the books, where she just takes off her top, and she's going to fight Kojin, and they're going to get into a martial art contest in this bathroom. And this is what I meant about choreography, where, when I do a fight scene, I always struggle with the idea of what's the story of the fight scene. Like, I need a story. I can't just show punch, kick, pow, block, because that's kind of corny, and that's not an exciting fight. I feel like I need a choreography moment, or I need the story to progress. I need things to happen and build in layers that make sense. Some people just like a pretty scene, and a comic book is, in its root, captured frames of a story. So as a director in a movie, you sort of, and a writer also, a director directs our attention. So where should you put my focus? That's what a director does, directs our attention. Where should I be in this story? What scenes do I need to show? A writer wants to show you everything, which is why when you get to writing, the books get enormously long, because a writer tends to want to show you everything. Something happens on the cliffside, he got to show you that. Something happens back at the house, back on the other side of town, he's got to show you that. Something happens with the babysitter in the barn, he's got to show you that. And they love just giving you everything. When it comes to movies and films and budgeting, because books really, who's going to say this book is 798 pages, you can't make it 900? That's not really going to happen for a novel. You get to write. Novels need tons of editing to keep the story going and to not confuse the readers. Editing is extremely important. But it's not quite the same thing when a movie has exactly an hour and 45-minute running time, where you've got to really explain why you want to make a 3-hour movie. You got to explain why your movie needs to be 209 minutes, for the cost, for the budgeting. And it's expensive if the director's cut just wants to show you everything they filmed and leave every shot running full length because they just enjoy the cinematography. I've got to show you every vista we filmed. I've got to show you every cool moment. And at some point, the pacing matters, where, you're killing me with the length of this. And in that case, we talk about, condensing and editing. And in a comic format, sometimes the condensing is because of, time constraints, where I don't really have time to show you all this stuff. Let me just cut to the most important things. And sometimes we get that in the fight scene, like one big page with an awesome character throwing a punch or something looks awesome page count wise. Page count that eats up 2 pages, and boy, is that awesome. But that's expensive in time in choreography because nothing happened but one kick. Nothing happened but one punch. And some of my favorite fights that I've ever witnessed in a comic book has a story where you could say they did this first, they did this second, they did this third, and then fourth this happened, and at the end of the fight, this is what occurred. And those tend to be the fights that we remember, that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The ones we don't really remember is when it was punch, kick, block, punch, kick, big punch, someone got knocked down. They talked a lot, Someone got up, they punched some more, someone else talked, and then he got up and they, which is cool because that's like seasonal stuff that builds to the big impactful fight that matters. If you don't understand where I'm going with this, it's like wrestling. The same two characters fight 1,000 times, if you didn't know. That wrestlers that are doing a tour circuit will wrestle again and again and again and again and again. And a lot of times, without being rude, it's the same outcome to stretch the conflict. There's a disqualification, someone interrupts, a referee gets knocked out, but usually there's an inconclusive ending. And the inconclusive ending isn't to the match, it's to the story. That you keep seeing these slices that keep the action going. That even though they fought here, it's not the big finale that I can count on. And what we remember as fans is the big story ending climax. Whereas the fight that brought a final ending to their conflict, that's the fight you remember. Not the lots of little skirmishes they've had on TV and at this thing and that thing building up to it. You remember the one that basically says, who's better than who? And in terms of comics, it has to be that way. You can't have two major characters fight and let there be a clear winner. That doesn't happen that often, but when it does, remember who's better than who. And it's important to treat that seriously because that's going to lock in a reader's mind as who can beat who. When you give us that story-ending conflict, we lock in and go, now I know who can beat who. And we don't have to argue anymore who's stronger than who could beat who. Now we get to say, well, hey, they fought here, and this is the guy that won. So now I know no matter what anyone says, this guy can now beat that guy. And it kind of works that way. So we go forward. They're getting the fight in. He catches her with a hook kick, which I like. A little rear kick and catches her, and she breaks the glass. Which, of course, was problematic because this set didn't really have breakable glass. The shower part of the set, I remember struggling to find the right material to get these shards to break apart. That took forever. Oh, my God. But anyhow, I was happy how it came out, that she hits the glass. And now we cut back to the parallel story that the assassin that's being hired by the Synthoids is showing up at the base. So you get to see... Incendiary, we have a sanction against a humanoid action unit called the Force of Six. And it's cute because the team is called Force 6, not Force of 6. So you could tell like their intel is still a little sketchy at this point, which is I had great fun playing with that later on. So she's saying, hey, come over, follow me to the monitors. So we go over to the monitor and we're reviewing the fight in episode 9. I think it's 9. I think it's 9. So we're reviewing the fight from episode 9 where the 4-6 fight a bunch of Synthoids. And they had cameras implanted in their optical chips that are recording the fight. And how I made this was quite clever. I actually went back to those scenes during the fight in episode 9 and put the camera inside the head of one of the Synthoid agents and took a picture. So you're technically getting what picture you would see if the Synthoid agents were actually recording the battle. So this isn't even a simulation. I actually went back and did this and went in, pulled up the old scenes during the combat, put the camera in the head of one of the agents and took pictures. So the combat data they're getting is 100% accurate for what you'd be seeing. And then I interpret it as if you didn't know that about the entire series. Now we cut back from them reviewing the combat footage to the quote-unquote real-time combat footage, where Kojin is battling this grappler chick, and she gets full mount on him, and then he makes a mistake and rolls over, and she takes his back. And she says, sure, I'll take your back, which if you know MMA, how dangerous it is to give someone your back. Which, in the early days when people didn't really know what a lot of the grappling arts were, that was a simple mistake to roll over because there's a lot of rules. You can't hit someone in the back of the head. And it's tough to strike. You can't hit spines and you can't hit the back of the head. So, again, in boxing, when you turn away from your opponent, it usually brings the end of the match because The referee realized that you're giving up your most vulnerable parts. Dogs do this too when dogs give you their belly. That's the most vulnerable part of an animal, is usually the stomach. And when an animal gives you the stomach, it says, hey, I trust you. I'm giving you my most vital parts. So some of these things are very instinctive, that he makes a mistake and lets her take the back, and she goes into a rear naked choke. And if you also watch MMA, you've got to say, oh, that's the end of the fight, because, you know, in most MMA fights, you've been so degraded that by the time someone locks in a rear naked choke, you're basically giving up because it's just too much to fight out of. You know, you don't lock that in the first 10 seconds of a fight. It takes time to build up to it. So in this case, our cliffhanger is him being hit with electricity generated from the palms of her hands, which is the juice she talked about earlier. You know, when they locked up hands, I'm going to give him the juice. He's being electrified, and he's in a rear naked choke. You've got to look at this to be continued and go, oh, Kojin's got to be out of there. This dude has to be done. How are you going to get out of this one? And I love this, that this is like an authentic cliffhanger. And the thing about cliffhangers, a lot of people hate cliffhangers and comment, oh, this is a cheap thing. But cliffhangers serve a purpose. And obviously, we all know the joke of a comic is to get you to read the next one. You know, the whole point of episode, 506 is to get you to read 507. But I like the idea of a cliffhanger. You know, I took that from the oldest inspirations. You know, the woman is tied on the railroad tracks and the train is coming, and we give you this cliffhanger. You know, the hero's about to be executed. How does he get out of it? I love those cliffhangers, and I borrow that motif, and I had a lot of fun with it. So we get the to be continued. This is the painted version of the next episode that begins. So we find him inside the rear naked choke. He hits her with a nerve pinpoint attack, and he basically catches her in the trap neck area, and all of a sudden she goes into a seizure. You know, she's foaming at the mouth. You can tell the fingers are locked up. She's in intense pain. It's basically a wrap where she's paralyzed and her organs are shutting down. So he did this from a neck shot, and now the second fighter jumps in. You know, he wants to basically exact revenge. So we get to phase 2 of the fight. And, you know, this is a good fight. It's basically the nunchucks or the light sticks versus his sword, his epple, his EP, whatever, you know, the fencing sort of blade he's carrying, the lighted saber is what he uses. So, you know, Kojin does the side twist and catches him. He breaks another piece of glass, cuts his face, very narcissistic. He's upset about that. You know, and the main henchman is sort of watching on. The boss is watching on like, okay, I'm taking combat notes. And, you know, we get a cute little journal that this is almost like his mental thoughts or a journal where he's writing notes mentally of what he's seeing and what he's going to take in. So he's coming up with an idea of how to defeat Kojin. You know, he's taking some damage again. A lot of spray. And we cut back then. So now that you get the idea that, okay, there's a guy taking notes. And again, these are the parallels that I bring. This, to me, is what I call my art of storytelling. That I feel like a lot of people sort of overlook and don't understand it. We have the main bad guy assassin watching two people fighting and taking in information on what he should do. So again, understand where I'm going with this. In one story, the bad guy is watching the heroes fight and taking in combat data for what he should do. Then we cut to the scene of the Synthoid makeshift base where they're watching combat footage from episode 9 and giving the Incendiary, which is this assassin character, information on how to defeat the 416. I'm giving you a parallel of taking in information on how to defeat your opponents. And I feel like some people read this book and they're like, oh, the action was crazy and it was cool the way you did this. And it's like, there was so much going on beneath the surface in my written stories that sometimes it stinks when people read it just the first time and they miss all of it. And you got to read it again and pick up on it, and read it again and pick up on more, and then sometimes you like to wait. Yo, I reread that story and it's crazy how this happened. And you're like, yes, you reread it and you caught more. I love it. But anyhow, they're watching the fight scene, and you know, this is another funny moment, literally a funny moment, where they're asking about the blonde warrior, which obviously is Fire Destiny the gunsmith. And she says, "Warrior? We think not. He appears to be a lookout. He did nothing more than fire a heavy gun. He is considered a weak link, and you won't have any problem dispatching him." And, you know, big spoiler alert, this is really Kojin inside the assassin outfit. So this fight, actually, this event is occurring after what you saw. So this whole time, I was trying to pretend that they were happening in parallel. But what you will realize as the twist in the story is that that fight earlier in the locker room, that happened before this. So I'm tricking you into thinking they're all going on at the same time so that you don't automatically get it that this is Kojin. So spoiler alert, we already hit it already. Kojin is laughing because one of his best friends is considered weak according to the enemy. And he's having a good laugh that they consider his best friend weak. When he, you know, and they, of course, they get the team. They don't understand the full team and the inner workings of the team. So I thought that was quite funny that even he laughs like, "Oh yeah, this guy's a scrub." You know, wait till I tell him that the enemy thinks he's a scrub because, you know, they don't consider him worthy of anything. But anyhow, this is one of my favorite lines in this too, where I forget his name. I'm drawing a blank in the middle of my own story. But he's getting his butt kicked by Kojin. And he's like, "Yo, get this guy." And he's yelling at basically his boss to help. Like, "Yo, get this guy. Like, what are you doing? This guy's kicking my butt. Help me out." And Kojin just says he's waiting his turn. Your turn is now. Like, you get it. Like this is classic old school martial arts where the tradition is you got to go to the school, you got to beat a bunch of junior students in order to prove you're worthy to fight the master. And that's like that's what you take. Like that's the risk you take. You can't just be good enough and challenge the master. You have to prove it by getting past his minions and not being too diminished to challenge it. And that goes with the idea, like, to beat the man, you got to really beat the man. You don't just do better than the champion to win. You have to prove you are hugely better than the champion to gain his accolades, which is, you know, in some ways very fair. You just can't edge out a champion. He should keep his belt if all you can do is edge him out. But that's another thing. That's like combat thinking and whatever. That doesn't matter. But, you know, they get into the fight, and there's more subtext in there, but we can get past that. So the bad guy's still taking in information, noted by the fact that I went back to the note-taking pattern of his thoughts. And, you know, he makes a move. Kojin does the front tuck over him, catches him, and snaps his neck using the chain, and he's defeated. Another cool moment that I love is that in defeat, he falls on top of Riva. And you have them defeated, laying on top of you. Like, he just beat his two partners, and they're just laying there on top of each other. This is one of my favorite stories. And then they basically, the bad guy starts washing his hands. And it is symbolic. He's washing his hands of the entire event. He's bringing it back to neutral. He mentioned that early in the story, but now those two are just having a conversation as you know they're going to get it on, and they're just washing his hands. Let me just wash my hands at the sink. So this is another one of my favorite lines in the story, that they're talking about it and they're discussing their fighting systems. And Kojin is saying, yeah, I've got internal and external stuff. Like, not only am I an outward fighting combat pugilist, I've also got internal disciplines, which is, you know, almost spiritual levels of energy if you want to get into it. But, you know, I love this line where Kojin just puts his light sticks here on the counter. And I love that. Like, in a moment of just total relaxation, you know, they know that this is an honor-bound fight. He puts the sticks down on the counter like nothing's wrong. And the bad guy's actually privileged enough to put his hands on the sticks. And he says, I'm going to kill you and keep these as a memento. And he, who's been wearing his glasses, here he is taking them off, and he put his glasses on the counter. If you go back, he's been wearing glasses this whole fight. Which is, you know, he's the indoor cool guy wearing shades. So you get the idea, the bad guy's wearing shades in the daytime. Shades at night. So, they're in this bathroom. He's cool as hell. So he takes his shades off and places them on the counter. And then Kojin picks up the bad guy's shades and he says, if you're going to keep my light sticks, then maybe I should keep your glasses. And he says, then perhaps I should keep these for the man whose eyes were so shaded he could not see his own death before him. What a line from Kojin. What a line from Kojin. That he says, if you're going to keep my fighting sticks, I'm going to keep your glasses because they blinded you to your own fate. Oh, what a line. What an exchange. So we get back to the honor thing where they're going to let each other stretch out. That's homage to a bunch of old movies. I can't remember the name of it, but it was, the famous one with Bruce Lee versus Chuck Norris. We're tapping some of my favorite stuff I've ever come across. So we've got the, I don't know if that was that Revenge of the Dragon? I can't remember the name of that one off the head right now. But, you get this moment where they're stretching and respecting each other, and they're getting ready to fight, and they're basically having their conversation. There's another good line in here. Oh, I love this line. This is another one of those brilliant lines that, I hope some of my readers who are into wordplay and storytelling enjoy. He says to him, is this personal or business? And Kojin replies to him, if this was all personal, you would have faced me, alone. And he says, if it was purely business, you would not have faced me alone. And what he's basically saying to him, that if it was all just personal, it would be just me versus you. Like if this was just about me and you, I wouldn't have defeated your two henchmen. I just would have went straight to you and dealt with you as an individual and settled our differences. And then he says, but if it was really business, if it was all 4-6 business, it wouldn't be just me here. It'd be like me and Destiny. It could be me and Agility. It could be me and Louise. It could be me and Jackie. It could be me and Premise. Like, I'm just telling you, if it was all strictly 4-6 business, I'd be here with a bunch of my 4-6 members, probably 2 more to equal your 3. And this fight would have went completely different. So he's basically saying the personal part makes it me versus your squad. And I love that idea that it's such a mix that he just handles it on his own. And if you know the future from season 3, you'll realize you're beginning to get the idea that I'm building Kojin, that when it's very personal, he does it by himself. So you're going to sort of see a shift in that as we go forward. But these are like little subtle things. And again, this is all in my head with all my notes and all my story writing, and I have, episodes that interlock with the future episode. Like, you don't know that episode, 24 locks in with episode 47. But I have a bar that locks those 2 episodes together with a continuing motif. You don't have to know that. And I honestly don't really expect you to keep that in your head as a reader. You're reading my book, you're reading 1,000 other comic books. So all these little nuances, I expect you to just get this little punch right now. And if you absorb the whole thing, you might get a bigger punch, like a novel. If you read the whole thing in a series, in a big binge, then you'll see all the punches adding up together when I put my combinations together. But I'm okay with just right now, you just caught this one little punch. So with that said, let's go forward. So they get into the fight. Blocks the elbow, takes a kick to the side of the head, breaks the glass, and the bad guy turns into a little bit of a competition where he says, that puts me up by 1 point. Making a little bit of a joke of an insult. Kojin breaks him through the glass. He falls through the bottom of the glass. I like the idea that I put the camera in front of the glass. You can see through the broken glass. And then here's the funny line. I'm going to smash him into little pieces. And then he runs through the glass, breaking it into little pieces. That's just fun stuff that I get to play with as an illustrator. That I get to have fun playing with little moments. But with that, they get into their fight. They're duking it out. It's just not going well. Obviously Kojin is a much better martial artist than this guy. As an assassin, he's good, but he's definitely not Kojin's level of training or skill. So now we have a part where the bad guy says, yo, we about to turn up. So now we have another to be continued where you can sort of get like, okay, these 2 guys are getting it in. Look at the stances. It's going to get crazy. Like, this is going to turn up in a very cool way any minute now. So we jump ahead. This is the painted version of the cover of the next episode. So, I like the red herring thing. I could talk about that for a split second. I mean, I'm not really crushed for time here, but, I like red herrings where I sort of like, this is, I used to love the old Conan books where they would show Conan on the cover, and it wasn't exactly what happened in the story, but it was damn close. And I like the idea of sometimes the red herring, where you see the dragons in the sky, and you see her with some sort of crazy crossbow, and you're like, is she fighting the dragons in the air? Is this the base's defense against dragons? Like, if you're reading along, this has no context, so it wouldn't even make sense to go down this way. But it is just a nice visual that she's there, being bombarded by this assault of dragons from the sky. Or maybe the dragons are just flying and she's just hunting dragons. But I just give you this visual that I think is very nice. Okay, so they're squared up. They're getting into the fight. And, he's catching Kojin with some good counter shots, a nice elbow. And Kojin goes for that neck pinch that he used to take out Riva. So if you're watching the fight and you've been following it, you should feel like this is the match ending. Like, this is the ender. He hit him with the nerve pinch. This should end the fight. And you could tell Kojin thinks he's won, where he says, goodbye, Huygen Vengate, I will wear. And there is a huge hint where he's about to say to him, hey, I'm going to wear your armor. But he cuts it off and goes, nope, I can counter. And he closes his own pressure points. Hello, Fist of the North Star type stuff. So he closes his pressure points and catches Kojin with a counter elbow and then switches to catch him behind. So he hooks around him. Now Kojin is dazed, and this is him having his gloating moment. And again, I didn't want to do all the tropes of comics where, the bad guy gloats and then the good guy gets the upper hand because the bad guy is taking it not seriously. No, in this particular case, this is not wrestling. When the bad guy is gloating, it's not buying time for the good guy to recharge. He's allowed to gloat and keep his advantage. And that's one of the things that keeps us from being a dumb moment where you're fighting this dangerous martial artist and you take the time to talk and give him the chance to basically get the better of you and reverse momentum. I hate that trope. So in this particular case, the bad guy's allowed to talk mess but not lose the tactical advantage because he's talking trash. And he gets to hit Kojin with a couple of shots and destroy what he believes is destroying his internal organs. Of course, if you've read the beginnings of the books, you know that the Force 6 have the weave, the mesh, the meas, the MEAS, that makes them stronger with the muscle fibers. So it's not as easy to defeat a Force 6 member. And Kojin in particular, who has internal disciplines along with just his external martial arts training. So he thinks he's taken Kojin out by destroying two of his internal organs, and he's actually wrong about that. So Kojin basically gets up, and he's basically ready to finish Kojin off using, his pugilistic style where he's going to use his fingers to penetrate the Kojin's internal force and defeat him. So when he's about to go for it, Kojin's eyes start glowing, which, is going to come up often. We're going to explain that. But for now, it's just like, what's going on here? He just tapped into his internal energy, and now they're going head to head, literally fingers into each other's heads. This is obviously the climax of this particular battle. And Kojin's able to pierce his actual aura and tap into him and defeat him. It's very gruesome stuff, but it's crazy that that's how he's defeated. And unlocks his chamber. Agility does this in the future. If that's a huge futuristic spoiler alert. And you're going to find out where a lot of this stuff comes from and see how it gets used as the 4-6 keep upping their abilities. This, again, is, early in their careers. You're not really seeing them completely unlocked. But we're taking time and enjoying this beginning foundation period where they're just learning. This is funny. She says, so now, that this fight is reaching its climax, we cut back to the synthoid in the base with the would-be assassin, getting combat data. And this is a nice line. She goes, this one, her code name is Asha. Now, Asha is what Agility says as he does his katas or he does his, his chi, and he lets out his energy. He says the Asha. Like, that's what Agility does as he lets off a shot. Ha! So he lets off that Asha. But they, in watching the video, misinterpret it as that being her name. So instead of saying like this is Louise or this is Lunstar, or they just think her name is Asha because Agility said Asha as he was doing stuff. So it's kind of funny that they don't get it. And Louise is basically like the lowest end Annihilator because she's the most undisciplined. She has the sketchiest sort of past. She's sort of a little bit more one-dimensional than the other. Like she's just sniper, and that's what I do. So she's sort of like the one-dimensional, and she doesn't have the best judgment either. So sometimes her judgment can get sketchy, so she's basically one of the low-level Annihilators. But they think because she did the best in this conflict that she's the leader. So they think because she, said, hey, get Jackie, I'm protecting this guy, and do this and do that. And she took out the first one by shooting a round in her mouth because the synthoid agent was mouth breathing. And she put a flaming round in her mouth. They think she's like the best. Like, wow, that's the leader, So it's kind of funny that the least Annihilator in their rankings, the enemy thinks is the actual best because she did so well tactically in the last battle. So, okay. So we get to the idea that when they go to reveal the last one, which is Kojin, obviously this is a joke, right? You should have gotten this. He's covering his face and masking his face. So the big reveal, you get it, right? This is the big reveal. He's covering his face. The assassin says there's no need to brief me on this agent's ability, this asset's abilities. And he says, because I am that guy. Like I'm the agent, I'm the 4-6 guy you're briefing me on. And this is the big reveal. Obviously, his face has the bruises because this is right after the previous fight. So I've just unlocked the part, the big twist is this assassin they hired was beaten by Kojin in the previous episode, in the previous activities, and Kojin's infiltrated their base pretending to be the assassin he just eliminated. So now you get the big, huge reveal that he was there the whole time. Now, when you read it the second time, you realize how funny it is. Oh, he rode the dragon. That's right. The dragon and Kojin. I get it. I get it. Him and the dragon. That explains it. He shows up. That's what was in the case. So you get to see that after he defeats Huygen, he goes over to the case and he gets the assassin armor. And that's what he did. So in real time, Kojin knew that these guys were going to be hired by the synthoids. He intercepted them, defeated the 3 assassins, and impersonated the leader and went to the meeting where the synthoids revealed where they're at. He found their base, and they basically told them, so now the 4-6 team really understands a lot more about the synthoids. This is going to come up later, too, in future stories. But this is like a huge nugget of information that he was able to recover. So now it's on. They're trying to escape. She's trying to run out the base and escape Kojin. She gets to the top. And again, she says Volvers because in episode, I think it's like 10 or 11, or it's probably 11, 12, and 13, they were called Evolvers, which is basically humans evolved is what they consider themselves. So when she gets out there, she sees that her men are burned. So you should get it immediately that, holy cow, the guards at the top of the base are burnt up. What was out there with them? Obviously, Kojin's dragon burnt up the guards. So she comes out to escape and says, hey, we've been infiltrated. And this is I like some of the writing. So this is a Chinese proverb that, it could be a Japanese proverb. I'm not really actually sure, but it's a proverb where it says, and I'm paraphrasing, the torch that lights the way may also burn the hand that holds the torch. And that's like a proverb that, the thing that helps you to see may also hurt you. So he's trying to give her this proverb where he says the torch that lights the way may also, and then she's like, yo, shut your mouth, you human meat stick. She just doesn't even want to hear what he's got to say, which I think is cute that she cuts off his proverb because, you're going to see this also play out that Kojin is very flowery with his speech. Like he's very stiff and flowery, like, he's almost Confucius say, which is, they're gonna goof on it, but he's basically trying to be like, he's always trying to say these epic phrases. He's always trying to like choose his words carefully and always try to give this moment. And she's just not really having it. So as she's having her discussion, she sees the wing flap pull up. And she sees the wing, and she has to get the point like, oh, wow, this is what cooked my men. So she realizes she's done here. So she says, my next will. And when she says next, she means the next version of herself. So she's basically admitting like, yo, I'm done here. But you know what? The next version of me, she's going to get revenge for this. And she almost gets it off, but he cuts her off. So she's trying to do the same thing. Like, she's trying to utter this epic last, this last oath to him. This last threat. I'm going to get you. And he just cuts her off and burns her. And you get to see the dragon, which I had to do this 4 or 5 times to get this right. This took forever to figure out how to do this 3D effect of the flame coming out. And I kept on doing this over and over again. But I could not decide what effect I wanted to get of the flame coming out. Where I didn't want it to be like it was pushing her down, like a big pushing flame. But at the same time, I didn't want like a laser streak. So I want it to be like a real flame comes out and have some force. But at the end, I want it to be like flames that pour around the person. It took forever to figure out. And have the particles coming off the body. So basically, he cooks her, and this is rather gruesome, but, a fitting ending that he cooks her. The dragon cooks her, and then you get, the final thought, it goes, in one way you've been right. You did have the last burn for today, and like, yeah, you're the last thing we burnt up. And you see, like, the dragon hanging out. He's got the dragon, he's got the outfit, the incendiary outfit, and you get it, like, he's the incendiary, like, literally, he's the incendiary of this episode. And that's our ending for this. So when we go over it, there's a lot of nuances that go into the stories that I feel like are the layers of it, that it's not just action, 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 that I like to layer in my many different layers. And again, if I read this book again and did this again, there'd be a whole bunch of other stuff I would uncover and pull up to the forefront. But for at least for some of the people, because I know some people who haven't read one of my books like to tell me about it when they haven't read it, based on the cover or the fact that it's CGI in nature. I've really dealt with a lot of people's reactions who haven't actually read one of my books, which was always kind of funny when someone says, I know what you do and you do this and it's like, you haven't read a book, obviously. You haven't read one, but I hear what you're saying. I appreciate the gesture. But I can tell you have not read one of my books when you talk about art and storytelling and all this. You haven't read one of my books. So that's fine. So at least now that I'm making these kind of videos, you can at least, if you haven't actually supported me on the Patreon or the YouTube or the Facebook, the Dynamic Universe, my Instagram at Dynamica Music, my Twitter is also at Dynamica Music. If you haven't chosen to actually get involved, but you want to speak as an authority on my work, at least now, if you watch this video, you can at least say, I know what's in his comic now. And at least, it can make a little bit of sense when you engage me in some of these fringe media. And at least, you can at least now have a sort of educated understanding of what it is that I create and why I go where I go. This is my Patreon. Thank you very much for those that support the Patreon. You get a bunch of wallpapers. You get all these episodes for free. I usually give you the story arc because I build my whole story in chunks and I release them as little individual episodes. So if you're on my Patreon, you get the entire thing usually first, months in advance. You get alternate covers because sometimes I switch to cover design, behind the scenes, artwork, things I've dumped that didn't make it to the book. You get to take a look at it. Plus, you get everything for free. All the music that we make, tons of stuff. But that's the Patreon. And again, the goal of the Patreon isn't really for you to like buy something from the Dynamic Universe. The goal is that you say, hey, I like this guy's stuff, and I'm going to support this guy and help him make his stuff so that he can make more books, make more art, make life a little bit easier, more tools, more resources, more time. That's the whole point of my Patreon. And it's not even the greatest system in the world. You know, Patreon, like I'm putting in way more into Patreon than Patreon puts out. So be that as it's may, buy one of the books would be the greatest thing. Write a review, share it. If I gave you one of my books for free, because sometimes I give people who've met me, I give books to, and I say, here's one of my comics. One of the coolest things you could do for us is put someone else onto our art. Like share it with someone else that might dig it. Everyone, if you're into comics, you got to know someone else who's into comics. If you thought something was cool, you've got to have a friend or a buddy or a girlfriend or a boyfriend who might like it too. And let them read it. And do us the spreading ripple, do the ripple thing where you don't just give it to them to look at through your portal. Let them look at it through theirs. Like, let them look at it through their phone. Let them look at it through their computer. Send them the link to go check it out so that it spreads as a message. Other than that, that's pretty much it. This was the Incendiary. This series is available on comiXology. I'm not sure what page we're on. Okay, so in the big book, you get extra artwork. The individual episodes don't have the extra spreads, so you get extra artwork. Don't forget to rate and share. Obviously, this is the comiXology reader, so it's got ways to link and share. This is Pinterest, a Twitter, a Google Plus, but I think is being phased out. I think Google Plus is coming up on a wrap soon. Facebook and Twitter. So share it. You know, if you read the books, you know, give us some feedback. Let us know. I love getting letters from readers who've enjoyed my book. So I love getting email and comments on all the stuff that I do. Facebook, we're the Dynamic Universe. And that's about it. Drew Spence, 4-6 Comics. I also do Killer Butterfly. Let me see. Now we're like moving around. Yes, Killer Butterfly is my other series that I do. I might start reading these too and do something about these. But yeah, these are very cool. It's Afro-Asian martial arts, I guess you could call it. A little bit of sci-fi and spirituality. It's a bit more towards the fantasy side. But yeah, this is a very cool series that is also ongoing, available on comiXology and ISSUU. And that's about it. I will see everybody later. The Dynamic Universe, thanks for watching. I will see you guys later on. Peace.